Brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso, sons and daughters of Africa, open your hearts and listen closely. What I share with you today is not only for our land, but for every spirit that refuses to kneel before those who try to dominate us. Look around you. See this bridge we are raising. It is not built with foreign steel, nor with the money of those who once enslaved us, but with our own strength, our own sweat, our own hands. Tires that once rolled across our roads are now transformed into a lifeline for our people. This bridge is more than just a path across the water. It is a passage from humiliation to dignity, from dependence to true freedom. Do you know why we chose to build with tires? Because we use what we already have. We will not wait for Europe to approve, nor for America to send aid, nor for any outsider to grant us permission to live as human beings. We take what belongs to us, what surrounds us, and we create something new. They claimed Africa cannot invent. They lied. They said we are unable to build. They lied. They insisted we cannot survive without them. They lied again. This bridge is a message to every colonizer who hides behind suits and ties, to every greedy hand that has stolen our gold, our land, our future. We are done with begging. We are finished with waiting. We will no longer obey. My people, I know your suffering. I have walked through your villages where children drink from polluted rivers, where mothers weep because there is no food, where farmers are crushed beneath poverty, while the riches of our soil fill the banks of foreign powers. I have seen the despair they wanted us to live in. But I tell you here and now, despair ends today. It dies on this bridge. We are not only constructing a bridge of rubber, we are building a bridge of defiance, of pride, a structure that tells the world, we will, we must. And to those who threaten us, who attempt to destabilize us because they fear an Africa that is free, listen clearly. Burkina Faso will never bow. We are not afraid of your sanctions, your armies, or your lies. We would rather face hunger than wear chains. We would rather face bullets than return to slavery. We will grow our own food, defend our own borders, and build our own future. This is not just about one project. This is not even about one nation. This is the awakening of an entire continent. From the Sahel to the Cape, from Dar to Dar es Salaam, Africa is rising. We are cutting away the ropes tied around our necks. We are shattering the silence they forced upon us. And we are doing this with the strength of our ancestors flowing through our veins. Remember this: no empire in history has ever endured once the people they oppressed decided to rise. And we have decided. So, to every child listening, to every farmer in the fields, to every worker, soldier, mother, and father, this is your call. Stand with us. Build with us. Defend this land alongside us, for Africa will only be free when its people refuse to accept anything less. This bridge of tires will carry us into a new dawn, and when history speaks of this moment, it will not say that foreign hands rescued us. It will say that Africans saved themselves. Burkina Faso, Africa, stand tall, stand proud, and never forget. We are free people. And free people do not ask permission to rise. Now let us complete this bridge and let the world witness what a united, unbroken Africa can achieve. He stood before his people and turned what seemed like a simple act into a revolution. A bridge of tires, something the world might dismiss as insignificant, became a thunderous declaration of dignity and resistance. He made his people see that this was not just rubber bound together. It was the heartbeat of a nation refusing to break. In his voice, the tires carried the sweat of the workers, the determination of the farmers, and the unyielding spirit of a people who refused to kneel. He spoke of how Africa had been told for centuries that it could not create, that it must depend on others to survive, that nothing strong could ever come from its own soil. But with this bridge, he shattered that falsehood. He showed them that greatness is not built with foreign tools, but with the courage to use what lies already in your hands. He reminded them that freedom is never given, it is seized. Dignity is not bought, it is earned. As he spoke, the people felt the power of his words shaking away their doubts and lifting their heads higher. This bridge was no longer a mere crossing of a river. It had become the crossing from weakness to strength, from waiting for permission to seizing their destiny. And in that moment, every listener felt themselves part of something far greater than their own lives. A movement where each stone, each tire, each hand working together became a weapon against humiliation and a step toward a future that no outsider could ever define for them. He stripped away every illusion planted in African minds, tearing apart the poisonous myth that without foreign guidance Africa is nothing. His words burned like fire through decades of lies. They said Africa cannot innovate. He showed them it can. They said Africa cannot lead. He proved otherwise. They said Africa cannot survive alone. He showed that survival and strength come from within. He reminded his people that these were not truths, but carefully forged chains to keep them begging for what was already theirs. He pointed to the bridge of Tyres as living proof that innovation does not come from outside, but from the courage to trust in yourself and your people. He told them Africa's strength had always been here, within its people, in its land, in its long history of resilience. It had been buried under the weight of colonial deception, but never destroyed. He called on his people to reclaim that power, to see themselves not as weak or dependent, but as builders of a future only they could create. Every word struck like a hammer against the walls of inferiority built in their minds. And as he spoke, eyes lit up with a new understanding. They did not need permission, funding, or approval. They already had everything required to rise. He inspired them not to put their trust in governments or in leaders, but in themselves, in the collective power of Africa. His message was not about worshiping authority, but about awakening the spirit within every individual. He reminded them that the continent had endured centuries of exploitation, yet it still stood unbroken. His words turned into steel, sharp and unyielding as he directed them toward those who sought to weaken and divide them. He spoke of the sanctions that were imposed to starve their people, the threats of armies that were meant to frighten them, and the endless flood of lies spread to make the world believe Africa could not stand on its own. He told them these actions were nothing but the desperate moves of those who trembled at the thought of a free Africa. He said to his people, "You must be ready to face hunger, because freedom is worth more than a full stomach. You must be ready to face bullets, because dignity is worth more than a life spent in chains." He reminded them of the generations of Africans who had fought before, who had given their lives so their children would not remain slaves. Now it was their turn to prove themselves worthy of that sacrifice. His words did not shake or falter. They roared with strength, declaring that no force on this earth could ever defeat a people who had decided to live free. He gave them a vision of courage so powerful that even fear itself seemed to retreat before it. Those who listened felt a strange fire rise within them, the power of a nation unafraid, a people who would rather die standing tall than live on their knees. He carried the struggle of Burkina Faso beyond its own borders. He turned it into a cry that echoed across the whole continent. He spoke of how their fight was not just for one land, but for every African who had been silenced, plundered, and treated as less than human. He reminded them that though the chains of colonialism had changed shape, they still bound Africa through debt, exploitation, and control. He called upon neighboring nations to look at Burkina Faso and see their own reflection, to understand that if one country dared to break free, it would light a fire for all the others to follow. His words carried the weight of unity, telling them that freedom cannot exist in isolation. A single liberated nation surrounded by oppression is always in danger. He painted the image of an Africa that shares its strength, its resources, its vision, an Africa that refuses to remain divided by artificial borders drawn by foreign hands. As he spoke, people could feel themselves becoming part of something larger than their own village, larger than their own nation. They were becoming part of a continental awakening. They began to imagine a day when African voices would rise together as one, when no outside force could dictate their future, when children could grow up proud of a land that stood strong and unbroken. In that vision, they did not see just hope, they saw destiny. His words closed with a dream so powerful it seemed as though the future itself was speaking through him. He spoke of a day when no African child would go to bed hungry, when no farmer would be forced to sell his harvest for scraps while others grew rich from his labor, when no mother would weep because her son or daughter had been stolen by wars, fueled by foreign greed. He promised them that history would not remember the chains that once bound them, but the moment they broke free. The day will come, he said, when the world looks to Africa not as a land to be pitied or plundered, but as a force that stood on its own feet and shaped its own destiny. His voice carried a vow that their generation would be the one to finish what their ancestors had started, to reclaim what was stolen, to make the sacrifices of those who came before worth something. He painted a picture of freedom that was not just survival, but pride, not just existence, but greatness. As his words sank deep into the hearts of the people, they felt a fire inside them that no enemy could extinguish. The unshakable belief grew within them that they were not waiting for a savior, they were becoming their own salvation. The crowd before him was silent, but it was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of awakening. Eyes once dulled by suffering now shone with determination. Hands that once hung heavy with despair were now ready to build, to fight, to protect. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the birth of something unstoppable. He spoke again, reminding them of their ancestors, who had tilled the soil, who had carried stones, who had fought with nothing but courage and spirit. He said their blood still ran in the veins of the living, and that same strength could not be erased by centuries of oppression. His words made the people realize that their true wealth was not in the gold or diamonds that foreigners craved, but in the hands of their farmers, the skill of their workers, and the resilience of their communities. He told them, "Do not measure your worth by what others say about you. Measure it by what you can build, by the dignity you can protect, by the future you can create with your own sweat." He spoke of a new Africa, one that would no longer look outward for answers, but inward for solutions. An Africa that would rise from its soil, using its own tools, its own knowledge, its own unity. And as he spoke, the people began to believe. Not in a dream handed to them by outsiders, but in a vision they could feel beating in their own hearts. His voice grew stronger as he continued, no longer just speaking but almost commanding destiny itself. He reminded them that the world had long mocked Africa, had long declared that the continent was only useful as a resource to exploit, never as a power to respect. But now, standing on the soil of Burkina Faso, the people could feel the ground shaking with a different truth. He told them the bridge they were building was more than an invention. It was proof that they did not need permission to create, proof that even the simplest materials, when guided by determination, could rise as a symbol of defiance. It was not the Tyres themselves that mattered, but the spirit of the people who transformed them into something greater. His words were like sparks, igniting every heart around him. He reminded them that Africa's strength had always been stolen, hidden, or denied. For centuries, the world told Africans they were too weak, too poor, too dependent. Yet here they stood, not with foreign tools, but with their own hands shaping their future. He pointed toward the workers on the bridge, men and women sweating under the sun, children bringing water to their fathers, mothers carrying baskets of food for those who labored. Look at them, he said. This is Africa. This is power. This is what they never wanted us to see. The people roared with agreement. The sound rose into the air like thunder, echoing across the land. He continued, saying that the bridge was not only connecting one side of the river to the other, it was connecting the past to the future, slavery to freedom, despair to hope. He reminded them of the farmers who tilled the soil without machines, yet still brought life from the earth, of the women who carried the weight of families on their shoulders, of the children who laughed and played even in the dust of poverty. This, he shouted, is what the world fears, a people who refuse to break. The fire in his words grew brighter as he turned once again to their enemies. He said no army, no sanction, no propaganda could crush a nation whose people have decided they will not kneel. He reminded them that fear is the only weapon oppressors truly have, and once that fear is gone, chains cannot hold anyone. He called on his people to throw away the illusions of weakness that had been forced upon them. He urged them to stand not as beggars but as builders, not as victims but as victors. He told them that Africa's future would never be written in foreign capitals, but in the sweat of African workers, in the courage of African soldiers, in the love of African families who refused to give up. The people felt a transformation stirring within them. Their backs straightened, their voices grew louder, and their spirits began to rise. He spoke of the day when no African would look across the ocean for salvation, but would look at their brother, their sister, and find it there. He lifted his hand toward the sky and said, "The sun will rise tomorrow, as it always does, but let tomorrow's sun find a people awake, a people no longer chained, a people ready to claim what has always been theirs." The crowd answered with a roar so powerful it seemed to shake the air itself. Children clapped, women wept, men shouted with fists in the air. Something inside them had changed forever. He spoke once more of unity. He reminded them that a single tree cannot make a forest, and a single nation cannot make a free continent. Africa's strength would only be complete when all its nations stood together, when no border drawn by foreign hands could divide them, when no lie could convince them they were separate, when no enemy could make them forget they were one people. He told them that the awakening of Africa had already begun. The bridge of Tyres was only the first spark, and sparks grow into fire. Soon that fire would sweep across the land, burning away the chains of doubt and the shadows of fear. His words came like waves, one after another, each carrying more force than the last. He painted the image of a future where African children would stand tall and proud, knowing they were heirs not of slavery but of strength, where no mother would bury her son because of foreign wars, and no farmer would sell his harvest for scraps while others grew rich. He promised that history would not remember them as victims, but as the generation that rose. When the story of Africa is told, he declared, it will not be written in the language of those who stole from us. It will be written by us, in our voices, with our pride. The crowd erupted once more, chanting, clapping, crying out words of unity. And in that moment it was no longer just a speech, it was a revolution, alive and breathing in the hearts of everyone present. As the sun dipped lower in the horizon, he ended his words with a vow. "We are Africa," he said. We are strong, we are proud, and we will rise. Let the world watch, let them fear, let them try to stop us. They will fail. Because a people who have decided to be free cannot be broken. The people cried out in answer, their voices carrying into the evening sky. They knew deep in their bones that this was not the end but the beginning. A new chapter had opened, written not in chains but in freedom. And as the fire of hope spread, from one heart to another he left them with a final call. Stand tall, my brothers and sisters. Hold on to your pride. Carry this spirit into every corner of Africa. And never forget, we do not wait for saviors. We are our own salvation. The bridge stood behind him, not yet finished but already alive with meaning. And as his words echoed, people knew that long after the Tyres had worn and the river had flowed, the spirit of that moment would remain. And so, to everyone listening now, to every heart that beats for freedom and unity, remember this. Africa is not weak. Africa is not poor. Africa is not broken. Africa is awake. Africa is rising. And if you believe in this rise, if you want to carry this voice forward, then stand with us in unity. Share this message, hold it close, and let it live on. And do not forget, subscribe now, so that together we continue spreading the fire of Africa's awakening across the world.